After a tsunami, or an earthquake, or a tornado, or a flood, or a fire, there's the rebuilding. And sometimes, maybe always, what is rebuilt is sturdier and stronger and better in ways that could not have happened without the original destruction. I find solace in thinking of our current administration as a kind of tsunami that is wreaking havoc in many areas of our lives and perhaps most importantly, our values. I find solace because I've noticed that truths long held undercover are being uncovered. And while we have much more to uncover, we have an opportunity to unpack privilege in ways that can make a huge difference in our society. Like the rebuilding after the tsunami, we have an opportunity to learn how to do things better. We can learn from our mistakes. I feel assaulted by all the bad and discouraging news I read and see every day. Perhaps some of you can relate to that. I've said this before, but these days I feel it even more profoundly, especially the children and families who are being held hostage at the borders. I can hardly bear it. I feel helpless, and then again, I imagine the way I feel now may have been the way others of like mind have felt throughout history when despicable decisions were made by people in power. For example, Unitarian minister Theodore Parker was a vocal and passionate abolitionist when not even his peers supported him. I keep reminding myself that probably the greater percentage of the American public is as shocked as I am. And I'm so grateful for you all in this community and your like-mindedness and all you do to help keep each other sane. One of the things that continues to bother me about the current political vibe is the division into tribes, and especially the tribe nationalism. This tribe wants to close borders and create a tightly policed social hierarchy based on various binary relationships. This tribe seems to define and pine for an American exceptionalism. They holler, "America is exceptional. Make America great again." I admit, I have fallen for that as well, loving this country simply because I was born here and then seeing it as a place that is special and unique. That somehow the people who live here are special and unique, exceptional, if you will. I'm in good company. Former President Barack Obama said, "I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber in my being." He continued, "Even today, we continue to have debates about what it means to love this country, to be a true patriot. But what greater expression of faith in the American idea, what greater form of patriotism is there than to believe that America is not yet finished, that it's strong enough to be self-critical, that each generation can look upon its imperfections and say, 'We can do better,'" end quote. Now, obviously, our current president also believes in American exceptionism, but I just can't go there. I could guess, but that's not the point of my argument. I've been doing a deep dive into popular culture to find some positive reflections about our divided country. And I've come to conclude that young people, particularly journalists, seem to be less inclined to believe in American exceptionalism. Maybe even some of our new Congress people. They seem to not be burdened by such a belief, which gives them the flexibility to ask different questions about historical events, and as a result have different conclusions. And I think this is super exciting, and it gives me hope that we're in good hands in the future they will create. So to help make sense of our current reality, as I said, I've been deep diving into popular culture, including the podcast world, where I've listened to some really amazing journalism. And I'm going to mention a few of them, and then I look forward to hearing from you about what you're watching and listening to as well. An example from popular culture is a comedy on CBS. You didn't see that coming, did you? It's called The Neighborhood. And I'm not really a fan of television sitcoms because they are, well, sitcoms. But I've had The Neighborhood on in the background because I don't watch Antiques Roadshow. I know. You didn't see that coming, did you? Anyway, so The Neighborhood is interesting because it acknowledges white privilege through the cluelessness of perky white neighbors. The series follows a white Midwestern family as they adjust to moving into a predominantly African-American neighborhood in Los Angeles for Gemma's new job, and they find the only house they can afford is in a working-class, mostly minority neighborhood. In a recent episode, white neighbor Gemma tries to return a backpack she stole from a store 20 years ago. I know, right? And Tina, the black neighbor, goes with her for moral support. The young white female clerk declines to help and instead advises her, snottily, I might add, to the store where she originally bought it 20 years ago. Now, Gemma is very angry, and she is very rude to this clerk. And as the tension mounts, Tina calmly tries to assist. And the clerk immediately accuses Tina of being angry and calls security. Gemma is shocked and says to Tina, "Wait a minute, do you realize you're being profiled?" Tina sighs and says, "Yes, and let's get out of here before you get me arrested." So, of course, the audience for this show is not people of color. Instead, the intended audience is white people, and beyond that, white people who think of themselves as woke, not racist, not a racist bone in their body. In each episode, the white neighbors are put in a situation where they become aware of the racism their black neighbors experience as a regular part of their lives. By witnessing these white folks empathize with their black neighbors, it's possible the show can affect some awareness in its white viewers. Then, as I said, I've also rediscovered podcasts and have found a wide variety of them that are taking a new look at historical events. Podcasts are a great communication method because they allow for time to slow down. They take place over a number of episodes, and so they're not bound by rigid space limitations, number of words, etc. And they have a tangible impact because of the ability to provide recordings of interviews, and hearing voices is really, really powerful. A recent podcast that hits home for Unitarian Universalists is called White Lies, and it's a national public radio broadcast. White Lies is about the 1965 murder of Unitarian minister James Reeb in Selma, Alabama. 3 men were tried and acquitted of the murder. No one has ever been convicted. 50 years later, 2 young Alabama journalists returned to Selma and exposed the lies that kept the murder from being solved and uncover a story of guilt and memory that says as much about America today as it does about the past. Because Reeb was in Selma supporting the civil rights movement, his whiteness didn't protect him from harm. In fact, he was denied treatment at the full-service whites-only hospital and was taken to the medical facility that was reserved for blacks. Neither facility, however, was equipped to handle the devastating head injury that the perpetrators had inflicted on him. And he had to be transported to Birmingham, which is over an hour away through dark and winding 2-lane roads. Over the course of 7 episodes, White Lies opens up the tribal structure of Selma, Alabama. The series happens just in time, too, because many people who can tell the truth now, finally, about the tragedy are aging. And they can only talk about it now because many of the people who were in power at the time have now died. A high cost for the souls of everyone involved. In the final episode, one of the journalists asks, once you tell a lie, how do you live with the truth? Indeed, once we tell a lie, how do we live with the truth? Another cutting-edge podcast that I've listened to is called In the Dark by APM, or American Public Media, which won a Peabody Award in 2016. This series features investigative journalism and in-depth reporting. Season 2 from last year investigates the fate of Curtis Flowers. You may have heard his name recently, who has been tried 6 times for the same crime. 6 times. For 21 years, Flowers has maintained his innocence. He's won appeal after appeal, but every time the same prosecutor, just tries the case again. In the Dark uncovers the poor quality and potentially illegal methods used by the investigator for the prosecutor. The behavior of the prosecutor to continue to victimize Flowers is just shocking. Recently, the Supreme Court threw out Curtis Flowers' conviction, and the story has taken yet more surprising turns since. In recent days, there have been 3 other significant developments, including new details from a key witness that may change Flowers' fate. But I'm going to let you listen to the podcast to find out. Cape Up, another amazing podcast with Jonathan Capehart, which is a broadcast by the Washington Post. A recent series on Cape Up is called Voices of the Movement, which highlights stories from civil rights leaders who changed America. One of my favorite episodes from the series is how segregationalist George Wallace became a model for racial reconciliation. The episode features Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California, who tells the story of how Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm was instrumental in Wallace's change of heart. It's a powerful and moving story. Congresswoman Lee was a young political hopeful working for Congresswoman Chisholm's presidential campaign when Wallace was shot. And as Lee tells it, Chisholm immediately suspended her campaign and went to visit Wallace. Years later, Wallace's daughter, Peggy Wallace Kennedy, gave a speech and said, "When Congresswoman Chisholm sat in my daddy's bed, he asked her, 'What are your people going to say about your coming here?' Chisholm replied, 'I know what they're going to say, but I wouldn't want what happened to you to happen to anyone.' Daddy was overwhelmed by her truth and her willingness to face the potential negative consequences of her political career because of him, something he had never done for anyone else." End quote. This sermon would be incomplete without mentioning the Netflix series called When They See Us, directed by Anna DuVernay, who also directed the movie Selma. When They See Us tells us the story of the Exonerated Five, previously known as the Central Park Five, the 5 boys of color who were victimized by the police and the prosecutor into confessing for the vicious rape of a white woman in Central Park in 1989. When They See Us is an amazing work of art and justice. There are no happy endings, even though they were eventually exonerated. Their lives and the lives of their families were tragically altered forever. When They See Us tells a lie, and as a result, there is some talk about reopening the cases tried by the prosecutor Linda Fairstein. And that is how we live with the truth. The examples I have highlighted here are the tip of what's out there. So while we're living during a tsunami, there are artists and journalists and comedians who are working to tell a different story. They're telling lies, and it will be up to us to help them with what is done with the truth, what we do with the truth. I believe the answer lies in engaged empathy, which will require time and effort. The effort that we're doing right here at Valley Unitarian Universalist, the hard work, showing up to feed and house people, educating ourselves about the stories of enslaved people without arguing against those stories, educating ourselves about the history of Jim Crow and lynching, but without flinching, educating ourselves about Redline right here in Phoenix, Arizona, and so many stories of injustice. The key is to hear the stories and accept them without making excuses. Even though daily I'm confronted with new assaults to values I hold dear and that I thought many Americans held as well, I'm hopeful when considering the telling and retelling of the stories of racial injustice. I believe we have a powerful opportunity to accept the measures white people have taken to preserve their power. We have an opportunity to accept these truths and in so doing, take a step closer to realizing the vision of the Declaration of Independence. We are the people. Thank you.